Hello, my name is Sebastian. Welcome to the Udacity Thought Leadership Series. It's a pleasure and privilege to have a person who I greatly admire today on my so-called show. Rodney Brooks, former professor at MIT, seasoned entrepreneur, born and raised in Australia, got a degree from Stanford University, then had faculty positions at Stanford, Carnegie Mellon, and MIT. And in his MIT tenure, did something amazing. He did robotics against everybody else. When everybody else did some lame, boring model-based robotics, Rod invented behavior-based robotics, which I'd say led naturally into the machine learning craze we have today in robotics.
Well, that's generous.
And almost didn't get tenure, but didn't get the biggest tenure position ever. And I think stands out as the most important roboticist in the history of the field, in my opinion. And I say
That's very kind.
I really believe that's the case. He also made the very smart decision when I applied at MIT in 1995 for a faculty position not to hire me. Congratulations.
And you've
well
never
done.
forgiven me.
I had to bring this up, of course. But it's great to have you on the show.
Well, thanks for having me here.
Rod is actually one of the smartest people I ever met. And one of the things I always enjoy about him, no matter what you talk, he can always take the opposite position, and incredibly well.
Well, we'll see what happens today.
Okay. I want to start a little bit of your life. So you made it to the pantheon of academics, ran CCEL, the MIT AI lab. And then at some point, 2008, just retired and said, I'm going to move on to something else. And even before that, you built a now publicly traded robotics company, iRobot, which is a very successful, maybe the most successful robotics company in the consumer space today.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. In the
Certainly
consumer
the
space.
largest number of robots sold, more than 5 million robots, I assume.
Oh,
right?
no, it's in the high 20 millions, if
Oh my
not,
God,
if
I'm
not
up to date.
more.
Wow,
Yeah.
my God. So,
Yeah.
so who else sold 20 million robots than
Yeah.
Rod Brooks? Lay the land. Like, what does it mean to be a CEO? What does it mean to be an academic, PhD student? When a young person comes to you, say, 24 years old with a master's degree, should I get a PhD? Should I start a company? What's your advice?
Do both.
In sequence?
I mean, well, I always did them in parallel. When the week that I started my faculty position at MIT, I started a company here in Palo Alto at the same week.
Which one was this?
Lucid.
Oh my God.
Lucid, which ran for 8 years. You can still buy software that I wrote back then. It's still
In Lisp, I suppose?
it was a Lisp. It was and it was in competition with. Back then, there were companies making custom Lisp machines, and I thought that all the engineering effort going into regular chips would let software outstrip custom machines, and that was right for a long time. Now we're building more custom machines for.
So, but if a person wants to be a PhD student, would you tell them start a company at the same time? That sounds kind of crazy.
Yeah, so maybe get the PhD first, but
And then,
my experience is opportunity comes from making opportunity, and making opportunity you have to do lots of things. It does just trying to do one thing, trying to figure out what's the perfect company to me is.
it's just too risky.
Yeah, you have to do multiple things and be ready to completely pivot in what you're doing.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, when I first met you, I was obviously in the context of behavior-based robotics. And you did something that to many people would like academic suicide. Like every single senior person in the field says models, planning, back in the day. And you would basically go to people and say, you're completely wrong. Everything is ever. I remember when I met with you and Tom Mitchell many years ago in Belgium, you said, everything you've ever done is wrong, Tom. And I loved it because it was so confrontational, so gutsy. And you were right. But tell us.
Well, he may not agree with that, but still.
I do.
He may not. Yeah, yeah. Well, you know what's worked for me is to find the thing that everyone is so inbuilt that people make the assumption without realizing they're making the assumption. So, for example, we built the Genghis robot, a walking machine, which led to the rovers that are on Mars today. And the assumption that everyone was making building walking machines up to that point was, you better not fall down. But if the robot's small enough, the strength to weight ratio is strong enough, it's okay to fall down. And if you look at insects fall down all the time when they're walking.
So do babies, actually.
Yes, so I said, let's get rid of that assumption that the robot is not allowed to fall down, and suddenly we were able to make much higher performance walking machines.
to date us here, we are probably older than most of the audience. This is actually interesting because in the time, people worked on walking robots, and these had, what, 12 degrees of freedom?
Yeah.
Up to 18?
12 or 18 degrees,
And
6 legs.
there was
usually.
no roboticist who could deal with a 12-dimensional planning process to get these legs right. And what you did is you did like 5 lines of code per leg, like move yourself forward, lift yourself up, and it worked.
And it worked, yes. And a little bit feedback, if a few legs are moving forward, move the other legs backwards, and that pushes you forward.
Remind us what was the reception in the field, like what happened?
Well, when I gave the first talk about this general approach to the ISRR, International Symposium on Robotics Research in France, there were 2 very senior academics in the back row, one asking the other, why is this young man throwing away his career?
Oh my God.
Which just makes me happier.
And then I remember there was a kind of a polarization. There were like, especially in Europe, people who really believed in you. And then there was people who were really upset about you.
Right. And I miss those days.
You missed those days, okay. No, you were really good at it. I really loved it. I learned so much from you, I have to say it openly, confess. I think I wouldn't be where I am in robotics and as enthusiastic if it wasn't for you.
Yeah, well, that's kind, but I think a lot of the self-driving stuff is
Same thing.
Same thing.
We never have a model of.
Yeah, we close a quick servo loop, and that's how the cars follow.
Yeah, so Rod was famous for saying the world is his own best model.
Yeah.
And I think people didn't fully understand this at the time because they all like to build models. But in machine learning today, that's exactly the summary. I mean, this machine learning field wouldn't have taken off without that recognition.
Yeah, although I don't think they got it from me, but that's kind of me to say that.
Okay. You've blogged extensively, and I recommend everybody go to rodneybrooks.com and read some of these blog posts because some are controversial, some are futuristic. You've blogged about self-driving cars. You blogged about the future of flying cars. And you blogged extensively about artificial general intelligence. Give us your view on AGI.
Well, I think AGI's sort of been a branding exercise because if you go back and you read the original aspirations of the original researchers in artificial intelligence, they wanted to build general artificial intelligence.
Absolutely.
That was absolutely their intention.
So did you for Genghis.
Yes. And so I think a group has come along and said, well, now we're going to do general intelligence, unlike all those other people. But they actually haven't delivered. But I don't want to go into that political part of the process. I do want to say that I think general artificial intelligence is much harder than most people believe, because I think people have seen, deep learning, which has undeniably had an enormous impact on all sorts of, it's had an enormous impact on self-driving. It's why we have Alexa and Google at home. We wouldn't have them without it. It's had enormous impact on ad tech, all sorts of places. But people sort of overgeneralize. If we see a person performing some task, we know how to generalize their competence. And I think people see deep learning labeling images successfully and generalize, it must really understand the images. And it doesn't necessarily understand the images at all. And so I think we've got into a situation where people think we can't be too far away from general intelligence. So we can talk about general intelligence right now, but I think we're probably a long, long way from understanding it well enough to build general intelligence.
I had Sam Altman here, who runs OpenAI, and he dedicates his life right now to building what he calls general intelligence. Is this something that's just too premature, or is it worthwhile? His argument, I'd say, goes to the following. If I read all the books and I succeed in doing this, and I build general intelligence, then that's the last company I ever built, because it can now build all the other companies.
I have trouble with that. I think I label him and OpenAI as Valley hypnotists.
They just raised $1 billion for Microsoft.
Well, it's not clear. It may have been $1 billion in credits for cloud services. It's very tricky to know exactly what happened. But many. It doesn't mean he's going to succeed.
Correct.
Either way.
And
so let me. Can I turn the question around? I said, I'm feeling that I'm too conventional these days. So I want to be unconventional here.
Go for it.
Suppose you were given the task and a lot of money, and you had to put from scratch thousands of kilograms into Earth orbit.
Good.
Would you do it just by writing programs?
No.
You'd have to do
Build
what?
physical launch.
You'd have to
vehicles.
build a physical launch
It depends
vehicle.
where they come from, whether they come from orbit or from Earth.
From Earth.
Oh, so good. That's important detail.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
they're in orbit.
Yeah, get from here up to
easier.
there. So you have to build other stuff. It's not just computation. Now, computers
Right.
help a lot. Computers help in the design, they help in the control. So what makes us think that to emulate Sebastian Thrun and his intelligence, all we need is software?
But let me push back a little bit just for the sake of the argument. All I do is I wiggle my arms a little bit and I wiggle my tongue, and that's my entire job.
Yes.
Occasionally I walk when I go to the restroom. But I don't build physical things. I have a team doing all the work for me at Udacity. I just take credit. And I occasionally help us pick the right direction.
No, you're missing the point here. The point is intelligence computational? Rockets are not computational. What makes us think intelligence is computational? That's what everybody's thinking now. That's what neuroscience thinks, that it's all computation. The language, the metaphors that we talk about with neuroscience or with artificial intelligence is computational. That's an assumption.
Let's dive into this one. In the question, it's a great question. So I could emulate my job, since you refer to me, which is to, when most of the time, sit in front of a keyboard and move my fingers up and down, and out come characters on the screen. And then I look at other characters on the screen with my eyes, process them somehow, and then move my fingers again. And if I abstract away the finger motion, it looks like an input-output machine that takes in characters.
But how
outputs
do you know
characters.
it's computation in the middle?
I don't know. Something is there.
See,
I
there's
know
an
if I lose
assumption.
my brain, I can't do it anymore. If you cut
Yeah.
the head, it won't work.
Yeah, but there's an assumption there that's computational. There's an assumption that the brain is computational.
Then lead us the right path. What could it be instead?
Well, maybe we need a different set of metaphors. Maybe we need a set of metaphors. And by the way, there's been a bunch of slightly weird, characters thinking in this way. There were a few people who were in immunology talking about neural Darwinism, which seemed a bit strange, and I don't think that's quite right. But other people have looked at different metaphors. So maybe it's about whatever it is that is in us is building structures which change the way things operate. And we don't have those right sort of metaphors to talk about yet.
So you'd say, if we stay and say neural net for now a little bit, that you shape your brain in a physical way, that when information hits.
And whether information is the right metaphor either. We are
Say
trapped.
email hits.
We are
Email
trapped.
hits.
We are trapped in talking about things this way.
This is so much
We are
fun.
absolutely trapped in talking about it.
I remember the early days when you said, "Oh, the world is the best model," and I was sitting there and thinking, "Really?"
Yeah.
It feels like the same thing again. If you take that seriously as a researcher, what type thesis or what research direction would you go to get more insight into that question?
Well, I think a fundamental question we don't understand is how order arises from disorder. And
In fact, the second.
from some point of view, that's breaking the second law of thermodynamics. But here we exist. Well, so something else is going on. And so some of the metaphors and measures we use, using information or using average or expected values, show just mush, but out of that comes order in a different way. And you can study and look at things where systems ratchet up their complexity.
So you would say maybe a new calculus of linear of differential equations could be one way to see if those could exhibit similar behavior and even richer.
Yeah, so let's use that as a metaphor. I think calculus is a great metaphor. Before calculus, people could solve certain sorts of problems. Once you had calculus, and you can attribute to Leibniz or Newton, we could solve many more problems. But it didn't change the understanding of the natural world. It was a conceptual tool which let people then solve problems they couldn't solve before. So it may be just that we don't have the right conceptual tools, and I'm not saying calculus differential equations, but as a metaphor, something of that order.
So you hypothesize it might be possible that what we're seeing right now is way overvalued, overblown, is really just pattern recognition in a very specific way. And to get to this new step where we would judge a machine to be as intelligent as a human being, we might have to change the entire understanding of what actually is the fabric.
Now there's opportunities here and other pieces. One, I don't think we're by any means exhausted what we can do with computation today in the current approach. We will get better at it and better at it. We will have self-driving cars on the road.
You already do. Just go to Mountain View.
Self-driving
Just
cars.
people behind the safety drivers.
Self-driving cars without safety drivers, and everyone will
By the
feel
way, I
happy.
think we're going to flying cars first, but that's a different story.
Okay, that's a different story, and my reasoning on that is a different argument. So we will keep pushing it, and for the next 100 years we will do great things. But I also think this is a great opportunity for some people who want to do a high-risk thing, is to go and look at some of these questions, and maybe you find the answers by looking in origins of life. How did life arise out of nothing? And that's not currently viewed with computational metaphors, but we still don't understand the structure of how that complexity can come about.
So you move it from electrical signals to chemistry, whatever it is.
Or other sorts of things. I don't want to say it's this or that. I'm just saying that it could well be that we're totally inadequate, and that there'll be, a dozen people who are watching that this right now, a dozen people out there who will eventually, have their names in not textbooks, web pages, as the inventors of, the Nobel Prizes of, because, to think that we, at this moment in time, understand everything, I think is incredibly conceited of us.
And it's been proven wrong in
every
the history
time so
of
far.
Every single time, except
Yes.
this time, because the future hasn't started yet. So if you were to hypothetically go back to MIT as a full-time professor, you would seek PhD students in what people would often then call esoteric areas, where we look at very basic dynamics, very basic metaphors for representing and but it would be machine learning, I assume.
Self-organization out of unorganized material. It would look different from existing machine learning, but it would be adaptation, building of structures, and it would be a high-risk PhD. You may not get a faculty job afterwards.
Oh, or the best. I should mention, again, for those of you who weren't around, I think you're the first person showing the world that a simple set of rules put into a complex environment can make what looks like more complex behavior than you would suspect.
Right. But by the way, Herb Simon said the same thing when he talked about an ant walking along the beach. So I don't want to take away from Herb Simon from Carnegie Mellon, who you probably
good friend of mine.
You probably knew him. Yes.
Very, very well. I
Yes.
still have his calculator at home. Let me take some analysis. You're obviously not just an incredibly accomplished academic, I would say. You're also an incredibly accomplished entrepreneur. And again, one of your companies has built more robots than all other companies combined.
Yep.
But you also recently started a company which you actually very passionately called Heartland Robotics.
It was called Heartland Robotics originally.
And I think the theme was America should lead in robotics.
Well, it was for manufacturing.
For manufacturing, correct.
Yeah, it was. And I made many mistakes with that company.
I want to ask you about this if you want to comment this. And then you actually also passionately called it, renamed it to Rethink Robotics, because you tell that we are so stagnant in the way we do manufacturing today. There's just no way out to do things, for example, like food packaging and various other things that robots couldn't do. But tell me about the experience. Like, how did you go in? Obviously.
Well, so Rethink Robotics passed away last October 3rd of 2018, although it's now a German company called Rethink Robotics that owns the assets. I think we were very successful in some ways and missed the mark in other ways. The ways we were successful were that we made it so that robots that work in factories could be safe enough for people to interact with. Before that, they had to be in cages. Now there are robots from many, many companies. You go to a robot trade show, there are uncaged robots where people are close to the robots. That was not the case when we started, so we really pushed that. The other thing we did, which I'm very proud of, is we built a way to program instead of using Pascal-like code or more modern Java-like code to show the robot what to do and have it infer that from interactions with the person. I think our mistake, or one of my many mistakes, and I had many mistakes, one of them was to try to sell into places that had existing industrial robots, because they used as their metric how fast existing industrial robots could operate. I think we would have been better off if we'd come out with a robot at 1/10 the price and put it into industries where there were no robots. But and that was my original conception, but I gave in to pressures from various people
I think there's actually a really great learning in here, which is fairly universal about incremental versus disruptive innovation. When I use Craig Christensen's word, where if you look at existing ecosystems, they tend to be incredibly well tuned to each other.
Yeah.
And the fact it takes half a year to install a robot makes sense in that context. So what would have been a market in which you could have succeeded?
Well, if I knew that, we would have succeeded.
Correct, yes, I would have succeeded.
that was what we didn't do. I think if we had gone after, if the robot had been so cheap that it was no longer a capex, but was an
like
OpEx.
$1,000.
Yeah. Then and capable enough with the software that we had, then I think we could have made progress in also, had them in I used to say baker shops, in all sorts of places, putting the fries into and out of the fryer at a burger chain. Very simple things which didn't require high position accuracy, but did require detecting force and didn't have to be really, really fast. Didn't have to put them in like that, but a person takes a few seconds.
Two business models in the beginning. You talked about industry, and you also talked about hobbyists. What happened to the hobbyist part? Because that seems to be a direction that you wanted to pursue.
Yeah, well, the version of that we did pursue was we had a software version that was used for research, and so the robots were very successful. They're still all over the world as research robots. You see them all the time in the robotics conferences, Baxter and then Sawyer. But again, we ended up pricing them because of what we put in them, and trying to meet the 35,000 hours that an industrial robot had to operate instead of 1,000 hours that a hobbyist robot might need to operate. The price was just didn't match.
When you said there were pressures to focus on existing entities with the robots, can you help us localize some of these pressures? Whether it's customers, whether it's your co-workers, whether it's your investors?
It was a mixture of the executive team that I hired drifting towards that and me not pulling them back strongly enough. I was not CEO.
Right.
I will say the investors. Investors wanted to go to a market that they saw was existing. To create a new market is scary.
Yeah.
So.
Interesting. I think there's great many lessons here. I believe many great companies got born out of this crazy vision, and the founder just working on it until it worked. Like, for example, making the world's information available for everybody. I think Google's Larry and Sergey ended up giving this direction despite various pressures. So if you go back to...
But they were really lucky.
That's true too.
They were really lucky in the sense that they used to say we're never going to do advertising, and then Eric came along and convinced them to do advertising, and that's what turned on the cash spigot.
The company would be gone.
It would be nothing. It would be nothing without that revenue stream. You need a revenue stream. You need a revenue stream.
Yes. So if you talk to like young wannabe entrepreneurs, what is the summary of your advice?
I have two pieces of advice, and they're contradictory. If make sure you build something that someone wants to pay for, but figure out a way to build something that no one else has thought of that someone will want to pay for, and that's the trickier part.
This is actually consistent with Clay Christensen, who says disruptive innovation finds a niche market which the big players have overlooked for being too small, and then grow your product at a lower cost base in this niche market and have it bleed back into the main market.
Yeah,
They'd be completely consistent.
So I'll give you an example. iRobot. iRobot was not the first company to bring a robot vacuum cleaner to market. Electrolux had one for 2,000 euros.
Yeah.
What we did was we went out to shopping malls and we asked people, both men and women, how much can you spend without your spouse freaking out? And there seemed to be...
That was $200.
$200 was the cutoff. That was the discretionary limit. So we designed the robot at $200. Now, a 2,000 euro robot was not selling well. A $200 robot started to sell well. And the other thing is, it didn't have to be great at cleaning, because it wasn't competing with fastidious cleaners. It wasn't competing with people who had maids doing cleaning. It was competing for a customer who didn't clean their apartment at all. So if they had a robot which once a week took a little ball of dirt out of the apartment, it was way cleaner than it had been before. So it didn't have to be perfect in the early days.
I love
now there's much higher expectations. But back then,
that is genius.
It didn't have to do much.
That is genius. That is really genius. So that's actually then we think done right in this case.
Yes,
really
yeah.
You found your customer,
and so
as a consumer, you have a huge base.
This is the other danger for entrepreneurs. They succeed once and they think they're going to succeed doing the same thing again, and sometimes every time is different and trickier. So,
I mean, for me, a role model of success in life, I can't emphasize this enough.
That's
honestly.
very kind.
And not just for me, for the entire robotics community. You know this. It's you've been changing the robotics field more than anybody else. Now you live in Palo Alto, and I guess you live in San Francisco.
I live in San Francisco.
What's next for you?
Well, I've got this new company called Robust.ai, and this gets back to artificial general intelligence. I think the world thinks it's just around the corner. What we want to deliver is 1% of it, because I think what's getting delivered now is 0%. How do we make AI systems, robotic systems that have a little bit of common sense, which the deep learning modules don't have common sense?
They're pattern matchers.
And they make all sorts of errors. How can we make them better? How can we make it easy for people to put AI into their existing machines that they sell already and make them smarter?
Okay, let me do the following. As a bystander, how would I judge whether an AI program has a little bit of common sense?
Okay, so imagine the last 10 meters of delivery. So the truck pulls up outside the house. There's a few steps, and you've seen the ads of various people say that they've got four-legged walkers. They've got all sorts of things in the ads. It's got the package. It's going up the stairs. Now, if there's a big barbecue blocking the way, standing there and waiting and speaking to it is not going to make it move. If it's a dog, maybe saying something to it, it will move. There's common sense that every human being has.
And let me just dive into the specific one. What I could do is say, as manufacturer, I could train with 10,000 barbecues and 10,000 dogs, and eventually I'd pick out the pattern.
Yes, but that's a really hard data set to gather. I think that so if you think that always machine learning is the answer.
I'm not saying this. I'm just saying.
But I'll give you a counter argument, if I may. Here's a place that there is a tremendous number of examples. If Microsoft wanted to collect them, of what's in the numbers in a spreadsheet and the outputs of the spreadsheet. Would you prefer to have your payroll performed by?
It sometimes feels like that.
A machine learning algorithm, that looked at lots of examples of spreadsheets, or would you use addition and subtraction and multiplication, built intrinsic in there? So yes, you can say we could learn how to do all spreadsheets, but it wouldn't make sense to do that.
I would
at some point,
a ground squirrel should not use machine learning to evade birds.
Yeah.
Because after the first failed training exam, it's going to get eaten.
Right.
That's an example. Then let me ask the last question here. So as you do this, have you, I guess, applied your own lesson, talk to the customer, find the niche where people currently don't use machine learning?
Yeah.
And what is it?
No, I'm going to tell you.
Too bad.
Of course, that's what we're doing. Of course we're doing that.
Good. And you've given up for the time being having something physical that you have to build and wash and finance and all that stuff.
Yeah, we're building, this is a software-based company. Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
Well, I can't wait. So he's in Playground, which my good friend Andy Rubin runs, and is a great think tank here. I think we're out of time. Any last comment you want to make?
I think of entrepreneurship as a disease, which I have and I can't stop. It's 35 years this month since I started my first company in Palo Alto, so I'm still doing it.
Congratulations. I want to thank you, Rod. It's always great seeing you. Again, this is Rod Brooks. Highly recommend to go to rodneybrooks.com. There's really enticing, fantastic essays, long essays about everything you care about. And, well, see you next week.